This one is for a set of puzzles. There's 5 different animals, and there's 2 variations on each puzzle. One is cut out from 1/4-inch Baltic Ridge plywood with a backer, and the other is out of 3/4-inch material. But these are about 6 by 9, and so I've cut the bear out, and I just got to attach it to the top sheet of plywood, and then the one behind it is going to be the backer. Obviously, I need to cut the puzzle out of the first one before I attach it to the backer. So I'm going to be attaching those. I'm going to use spray adhesive for this. Something I don't use real often, but it comes off pretty easily, and for this type of pattern it'll work. Each of those is also going to have a puzzle made out of 3 pieces, 3/4 or thicker. Each of the puzzles needs to have a hole drilled for the animal's eye, and they're not all the same size. I made these at my floor standing drill press, but you can use whatever tool you have in your shop. It is always a good practice to drill holes before cutting for several reasons. The first is that you have more material to hold onto while drilling. The second is that when you drill a hole near the edge of a workpiece, the bit is less likely to wander and ruin the edge if there's more material between the drilling site and the edge of the wood. Each puzzle with backers will also need a pilot hole to thread the scroll saw blade through to start to cut. You want to make as small a hole as possible, just big enough to fit your blade. It's also best to place the hole in a spot as inconspicuous as possible on the finished puzzle. I'm going to cut around the perimeter of the animal first, and then I'll make the inside cuts for the puzzle pieces. I'll explain why I do this when I get to that step. These puzzles will be cut from 1/4-inch thick Baltic birch plywood, so I have chosen a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade. That should be small enough for the pieces to fit snugly, but not too tightly. This is, after all, a child's puzzle, and you don't want them to get frustrated trying to put the pieces together with too tight a fit, but you don't want a sloppy fit either. There aren't any difficult or tricky cuts on these animal puzzles, so I recommend this as a project for a beginner on the scroll saw. You need to take your time and follow the lines as accurately as you can. I highly recommend a lighted magnifier and foot switch as 2 accessories for your scroll saw. The magnifier makes it much easier to accurately follow pattern lines, no matter how small they may be. If you have a foot switch, you can keep both hands on the workpiece and use the switch to stop and start the saw blade. The whale emerged as it should have, slipping out of the frame easily. When we get to the freestanding puzzles, we'll check to make sure the pieces fit together, whether they're assembled from the top or the bottom. You'll see what I mean when we get there. For the puzzles with backers, I want to make sure the pieces will fit in from the top, because this is the way these puzzles will be put together. The trial went smoothly, so I can move on to the next step, which will be cutting out the puzzle pieces. I used a number 3 Pegasus modified geometry blade for the cut around the outside of the whale, because that needs to be easily removed from the frame by just flipping it upside down. This is so the child can make the puzzle over and over again to intensify their fine motor skills and eye-hand coordination. This is an educational toy. I don't want a sloppy fit between the puzzle pieces, so I switched to a number 2 zero blade for those cuts. My usual procedure for puzzle pieces is to make any through cuts first. By that I mean making cuts where I can start at one side of the piece and cut to another without moving from one line to another. In other words, I'm cutting that piece with one long, smooth cut by starting at the top of the whale's head and moving along that line until it ends where the whale's mouth would be. If I cut from the top and then made that right angle cut with the next piece, I would likely end up with a puzzle piece with a slight bump where the turn was made. Whenever I can, I make cuts that will leave me with smooth curves and nothing that will need sanding later. After cutting the first piece, I move to the one it touched, which formed part of the whale's bottom. Once again, I could make this as a continuous fluid cut. I'll do this for every piece of the whale and use the same process for every other cut on the remaining animals in the set. I switched to a number 9 Pegasus modified geometry blade for the outside cuts on the 3/4-inch thick freestanding animal puzzles. The larger blade will allow me to make these cuts more quickly, and because these are outside cuts, there's no concern for loose or tight-fitting pieces. Not far into the cut, it became obvious to me that the blade was getting dull, It was time to replace it. A dull blade cuts more slowly, but it can also start to burn the wood, and then you'll have to go back later and sand away any spots where burning occurred. Sanding irregular shapes is a time-consuming pain, so it's best to change the blade as soon as you realize that it's getting dull. After cutting the pig shape, I made the same outside cuts on the other animals while I had that fresh number 9 blade in the scroll saw. Then I switched to a number 3 blade to make all the inside puzzle piece cuts. The procedure was the same as for cutting the puzzle pieces in the 4-inch plywood, only using a larger blade. Because scroll sawing involves frequent blade changes and threading blades through pilot holes, I've greatly come to appreciate my Pegasus scroll saw. I have previously owned other saws that required tools for blade changes, which made the process both inconvenient and slower. On the Pegasus saw, the upper and lower blade holders use a thumb screw that's tightened by hand. The process is easy and quick. So there you have the completed puzzles, both in the backer and freestanding versions. After I completed the puzzles with the backers, I showed them to my wife to get her opinion. I asked if she thought they would look better if I painted the animals, and we both agreed that they did. I took them to my finishing room and gave them each several coats of brushed-on acrylic paint. One coat was not enough for complete coverage. I decided to make the freestanding puzzles from oak, and I gave them a polyurethane finish. This finish is child-safe once it dries, and a child old enough to put these puzzles together should be past the age where they put everything in their mouth. Still, the pieces are small enough that adult supervision of a child playing with these is a good idea. What do you think of this project? Are you going to make the puzzles? Will you paint the plywood puzzle pieces? What wood or woods will you choose for the freestanding puzzles? These are small enough you may be able to find the material for these in your scrap pile. As always, I would greatly appreciate a like and for you to subscribe to the channel. These small gestures on your part help me to grow the channel and to continue providing new content. If you're in the mood to watch more, there will be a suggested video to see next on the screen.